welcome you, everybody. Thanks for joining. My name is Chris Cooley. I'm one of the co-founders of OZworks Group, which is an online opportunity zone centered community for people who are very, very dedicated to opportunity zones, and for those who are just getting started. So we have a lot of material in there. This conversations fireside chat is part of the education that we do. And, we have this goal to democratize access to opportunity zone information. And Andre, appreciate you being a part of that mission today. And so I met Andre through one of our members, Rachel Riley, who's here. Thank you, Rachel, for making the introduction. She said, hey, you got to meet this guy. He's doing some really cool stuff. And Andre, we had a conversation a few weeks ago, and I appreciate you being prepared and ready to really kind of peel back some layers of what you've been doing in opportunity zones, tell a very real story about how that's been, how that's played into your strategy. And, we're looking forward to hearing more about that in order to potentially inspire other people to do projects in a similar way that have to do with social impact. So again, appreciate everybody being here. Andre, thank you, first and foremost. I'm going to let you do your own bio and intro. So if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, your company, and your role.
Sure. Thanks, Chris, for bringing me on today. And hey, great to see everybody here in this format. My name is Andre Fowlkes. I'm the president of a venture development group called StartCo based in Memphis, Tennessee. My background is in financial services for years, both in New York City and San Francisco, before coming back to my hometown here in Memphis. StartCo originally began building tech companies through accelerator programs, probably about 12 years ago. And we've since evolved, wanting to meet the community more where it is. We provide a lot of these early stage building concepts, not just to startups, but to governments, universities, and corporations, whether they're looking to launch new technologies, launch new civic innovations into the community, or bring us in to provide train the trainer type work for them. One such client that we had is a real estate development here in Memphis called the WalkOn Union, which is breaking ground in about a month or so in an opportunity zone, which sits right at the gateway coming into our downtown area. It's a $1.5 billion real estate development that sits at the gateway connecting two disconnected communities. The Edge District, which had been pretty much abandoned for a number of years, and also South City, which is one of our most distressed zip codes in our community. And so our goal was to work with them to bring more innovation and entrepreneurial activity to the WalkOn Union, but also connect these neighborhoods to the downtown urban core. And so I spent a lot of my time at StartCo doing a lot of business development, alignment of partners, government relations, raising of investment capital, and also designing strategy and consulting services for some of the clients that we work with that help pay the bills. And so it's been great. I do this with my business partner, Eric Matthews. And we have a team of people that range from our staff to different contractors who work on a variety of different efforts. Some things that we're passionate about is meeting the community where it is. So this steps into the civic and social realm. So we spend quite a bit of time in bringing these innovative principles to helping advance education efforts, helping to fight poverty, and spending a lot more time addressing some of the disparities in Black business that exist in our area. The opportunity zone was actually a force multiplier for us because it brought us to the table. New outside investment came in and supported innovation and entrepreneurship. And it forced others in the community to start saying, well, what are they doing over there? Maybe we need to start diversifying how we look at some traditional forms of economic development. And so, Chris, I know we'll spend a lot more time today kind of going through those different avenues, but that's just a little bit of background on who I am and what our organization is doing.
It's great. Yeah. And I've already got like my notes, and you said the key words that I want to dive into a little bit more. Sure. So if you could, Andre, talk a little bit more about the WalkOn Union. This is an OZ development, right? And I know that there were some nuances of this that in our initial conversation were really kind of interesting and unique.
Sure. Yeah. So it's one of our largest developments in Memphis. And it's a mixed use development with 2 hotel properties, residential units, about 400,000 square feet of office space plan, about 70,000 square feet of retail plan, a couple of parking garages. And when we started talking with the lead developers, they were trying to build something that would create cascading returns for the future of Memphis, not just getting something up and going and move on to the next thing. And when we started talking to them about more of our mission, about building more innovative companies and talent that creates cascading returns, we decided to mix the two together. And through that, it was around the same time a couple of years ago when we first started having discussions, we were also talking with the city of Memphis. The city of Memphis was inventorying its fiber network underground and trying to figure out if they lit up some of that fiber, what would we do above ground? And they reached out to us and we started thinking more about smart cities. You know, at that time, we also reached out to a colleague of ours, Chelsea Collier with DigiCity, because she's one of the more well-respected smart city experts out there in the country. And she started helping us think through how we could possibly turn this mixed-use development into a truly converged, smart and connected city. And what does that mean? Converge meaning connecting all your systems, everything from your HVAC systems to your access controls, security cameras, street lighting, you name it, all the way to the parking garages, so that we can collect data. And we use that data to better solve problems. And so this concept kind of became the name, the digital city. And we decided to use the digital city concept as a means to start building what would be called a consortium, basically a member base of public-private partners that would work together to solve these problems. Some of the areas we're looking to solve is mobility and transportation. We're also looking at areas around Black entrepreneurship and workforce. We're also looking into digital equity and economy. All of these are not technically tied to digital infrastructure, but that's what we wanted the digital city to do, to better meet the neighborhoods where they are. Yes, there are your traditional smart city elements that sit in this, but we think there's some untraditional areas. If you look at our most distressed zip code, which is South City, 38126, we noticed that 83% of their households did not have wired internet to their homes. And so looking at infrastructure for them was very different than looking at a mixed-use development in the heart of downtown. And that was about providing better access, digital literacy and education, and also building better environments in their community that would support those households, in particular, their youth and their parents. And so that's kind of the whole concept around, you know, this development. It wasn't just to build this amazing advanced community. It was also to build bridges from communities that don't have as much opportunity so they could participate one day as well.
You know, that's a topic of interest. I'm here in Rochester, New York, and the digital divide there's literally a highway that creates that, right? Or at least that is a geographic sort of boundary that splits areas. So how do you overcome some of that conversation? I mean, it's like there's a huge infrastructure play in that, right? So how did you solve it, I guess, you know, and who did you talk to start to make progress happen through that digital divide piece?
Well, by all means, we have not solved it.
Memphis, oh, you don't have the answer to the world's
Memphis
problem?
does, we have right now the slowest internet in the country, and approximately half our households don't have wired internet. So we haven't solved it. Look, we started on a journey about 6 years ago where we started, pushing a concept called the social envelope. And all that really means is there was a book written back in 1994 called Beyond Technology's Promise, which talked about if you're going to introduce technology to youth in a community, you have to think about the social set of expectations you surround them with, meaning the types of skills, the types of environments, and the people and organizations that build a village around them. And so we called it the social envelope, and we started having that dialogue. And that dialogue was very important because our recidivism rate was extremely high. Many times our communities had given out computers, hundreds of thousands of them over the years, given out internet. But 2 years later, 87% were right back where they started from. And so the social envelope was about how do you meet them better where they are, think about their journey, and what's the right mix of services and products along the way. And so we started testing that, and we started to see some success there. And we are matching that with a variety of different programs, whether it's from Comcast and some of the offerings that they have to reduce it in terms of cost, whether it's even certain parts of our community who are putting in the infrastructure to bring it to those actual communities themselves. But we have a long ways to go on the actual connectivity piece. even though we're a little bit further along on this strategy around the envelope of supports that we surround them with. So it started with a lot of messaging and marketing. Actually, the pandemic actually helped us, right? It helped us rally more resources off the sidelines to support it. So there's quite a few factors there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just incredible to, and you know, there's these parts of these conversations that I think we sort of like breeze past, and it's you said 6 years, you started 6 years ago, right? Like this time that it takes to make positive social change happen, it starts with a vision, it starts with commitment, and that's one of the things that I look at the OZ incentive as. You know, it's a 10-year marriage, you know, it's a commitment, it's a relation, there's time to build those relationships. And so I think it's really important just to make a side note of that. You know, bad news happens like in an instant, so it's easy to report on. Good news happens over time, you know. And so you mentioned meeting the community where it is, and marketing and outreach, and, you know, in some ways it sounds like education. Can you give some examples of like what you actually did to meet the community where it is? You got to build trust in some way too, right? I would think.
Yeah, so I think there's a few things. I mean, we've been working, you know, I'm from Memphis, and so we've been working in this community for a long time. And our mission at StartCo is a 20-year mission. So we're around year 11 or 12. So we've been messaging around this for a long time. But what we're very good at is launching new things and teaching other folks how to maybe move their talent forward, improve their programs. And we bring a lot of these innovative principles to the table. And a lot of this starts with a building process that we believe in. And you know, when we do like an R&D effort, right, with the South City neighborhood that I was mentioning around the digital equity and inclusion, who wants to put the hard work in and do the R&D around that? Okay, who wants to get out and actually do the primary and secondary research, go out and have 100 to 200 discovery interviews with the community themselves, take that input and let it inform what you're actually going to build? The original ideas that we had have shifted and changed so much because of that input. And when you actually sit down with folks and let them be part of the process, they will buy into it on the back end of it. If you just have town hall meetings, it's great, but it doesn't get to as rich of a conversation as one-on-one dialogue. And that was very, very important as we went through this. And then that kind of led into what we wanted to design. And then you had to go raise money on the back end of there. And so being part of the OZ helped us raise money, because the real estate developers are not only funding some work that we're doing for them, but they're also helping to fund some of the work that we're doing in these other communities. They're also peeling off a portion of their private equity dollars to support new innovations, new startups, and new systems that support underserved communities. So when you have that at the table with you, and we're joined at the hip when we go talk to others in the community, it helps, right? It helps us raise those dollars. It helps get meetings with people that we need to get meetings from. And so that was something that we really appreciated. One of the biggest troubled things that we have over the years was getting folks to listen to more innovation and entrepreneurship and why it should be at the table and not just a check the box type item. Having those real estate developers with us really helped on all fronts there.
Did you find, Andre, when you were speaking with these developers, like, were there questions that you asked, and did you already have relationships with them, or did they have a social impact mission tied in as well? Like, how did you sort of like filter that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit of both. Some I've known for years, right? I mean, Memphis is a city where, you know, it's all about connections and relationships and networking with the right folks and building kind of that core around you. But at the same time, it had to fit from a philosophical standpoint, and where they're trying to go with their development and where we're trying to go with talent and technology and startups and jobs. It just kind of made sense to kind of bring those things together. And so that was actually, you know, a bit serendipitous as well. Based on some dealings that have been going on in the Memphis region, but it turned out to work just fine. And it's not all roses, right? I mean, you know, they have a job to do. They have to build a successful real estate development that doesn't always mesh perfectly with the civic agenda. We get that. And so we sit in the middle many times playing broker, helping people understand both sides. There gets to some testy conversations from time to time, but that's to be expected.
Yeah, and you mentioned, and you've said it a couple of times, like force multiplier. When we spoke, we talked a little bit about the OZ component of all this, right? And there's a reality in this OZ component. And one of the things that you painted a picture for me, it was like, you mentioned this being in like the center of a donut, right? And so how did the OZ play into that force multiplier? And I'm thinking more specifically, like, in as much as you can, and it's appropriate to get into, like, what does your OZ deal look like? Because it's not all OZ stuff, right? It's like it's utilized in certain strategic ways. So maybe as much as you feel comfortable talking about, like, what does the deal look like, and how does that play into this force multiplier effect?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by the deal. So I don't know if you want me to go into the specific economic portions of the OZ. I don't know if I'm comfortable sharing all that, but
Sure.
I can talk about what the plans are and those types of things, right?
Yeah, that'd be
So,
great.
with respect to, the OZ developers themselves, yes, they're sitting, in a literally a blighted neighborhood that had been mostly abandoned, and it really kind of hurt development to a couple other neighborhoods as you're approaching our downtown area. And so their whole idea was, if we could build in the middle there and be very deliberate about connecting the neighborhoods that are disconnected, it would activate those neighborhoods better, because there's also planned developments there. And so what does that mean? That means thinking about walkability, thinking about pedestrian movement, rapid transit, and things of that nature, even land use in terms of retrofitting old bridges and pass-throughs that are basically eyesores. So if tourists are walking by, they just turn right back around and go the other direction, because they say, well, who wants to walk down there? These design elements are critical to connecting these communities and bring them together. At the same time, the development has been very deliberate around diversity and who they bring onto the project in terms of participation and contracting. So we see this in communities all over the country, making sure SMWBEs are participating. Memphis is a 63% Black city, and so making sure we're deliberate around that is a big challenge. So the fact that we have on our development team folks who wake up every day trying to make that happen is a pretty big deal in my mind. I've seen many developments in the past have hardly any participation with regards to that. So this is something that the city of Memphis and our Shelby County government has been pushing. And I think the WalkOn Union has done a good job there as well. And so there's those plans in terms of the civic elements of their development that I think matches with what they're trying to do from a structural standpoint. And then we kind of sit in the middle there, and we're providing attributes along the way. So what StartCo does is we grow jobs through early stage companies and small business supports. They want to have more small businesses and early stage companies on their campus. So we're going to build an innovation building that's about 150,000 square feet, where we hope to have half of that building for early stage startups, academia, venture development organizations like ours. But at the same time, we'll have some of our corporate giants come in with some of their corporate innovation elements that are there. And I would say overall, we're turning the actual complex into a digital test bed. And so there are certain strengths that Memphis has from our industries that range from logistics, that range from home services, agriculture innovations, medical device. And so we're talking with many of these corporate entities that are here in our region to see if they could help facilitate better exchange of their corporate employees with innovators, academia, and startups. So that's just a little bit about how they intersect.
That's great. I'm constantly thinking about pulling out little nuggets, especially for listeners and participants here. And so one of the things that I heard in what you just mentioned is, your culture and commitment to social impact internally, right? You mentioned your team is plugging that, is thinking about it, is talking about it, and it seems like that's a nugget or a takeaway. And I'm assuming that's something that you instilled from day one, or maybe it's something that evolved over time.
It took time, right? In the beginning, we're just trying to get something off the ground that spoke to bringing more tech jobs to our community. Someone pointed out to us probably about 9 years ago, and I think we were doing some type of events, and basically the majority of the crowd was white, white males, and working in the respective tech industries. And so it got us thinking a little bit about going forward. And so we've been pretty successful in terms of trying to change that, where we're seeing now about 42 or 43% of those that we work with are African Americans or people of color. And we're seeing about 45, 46% are women. And so we're trying to maintain that. There are drop-offs, though, here, and as you see in other cities, in terms of the securing of investment capital beyond that. And so we're still trying to focus on how we help facilitate that better as well. But there's still a lot of common challenges that we still face. And in past years, we would groom this talent, help them, and then investment capital from other parts of the country would steal them away to where they are. So we had to kind of rethink some of those elements as well. So it's very complicated, but we're going to keep pushing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so inspiring and really appreciate that. It's I look at these types of conversations and these types of commitments as life, almost lifestyle changes. If you're talking about personal development, right? It's like we are making a change, and it's something that takes commitment and team commitment and constant sort of revisiting and conversation around. So commend you for that. Thank you for that. You know, you talked about a little bit about challenges. And so, you know, there's certainly a lot of them in some cases, right? So what about, and actually there's a question here, and I can kind of play these two things together. This person is asking about some of the challenges, especially with COVID, like, so meeting with rural communities in times of COVID, and having also that lack of infrastructure, the broadband connectivity, transportation, all the challenges that you mentioned. Like, how did you circumnavigate that? Like, and maybe what were some of the challenges around all of these challenges?
Yeah, I mean, with respect to rural, I don't have as much information there. I mean, most of our efforts are in our urban core in the Memphis community. But a lot of their struggles in terms of disconnectivity relate to some of the things that we're seeing. So you see very similar rates of disconnectivity in rural communities as you see in our poorest communities here in Memphis. So you're posed with some similar challenges there. Luckily, it was partnerships that helped us kind of navigate that better. So I'll give you a couple examples. And some of the connectivity challenges that we were having were in some of these poor neighborhoods. We worked with a group called Urban Strategies here, a group called Knowledge Quest, and a group called Code Crew, who already had pre-built relationships with the community, but also had case managers who had good relationships with the households. And so we were still able to communicate through the case managers to let them know of the resources that we were trying to bring to them. If we didn't have that, we would have just been, throwing darts at a wall and hoping they would hit. And so it's these relationships that speak to this kind of civic realignment of partners. To me, the biggest challenge that I faced in the past 15 years is the alignment of the partners to execute on tangible strategies. We get together many times in the past and we'll have meetings and talk about things. And they're just that, they're meetings sometimes, right? And when it comes down to reevaluating ourselves, taking a true gap assessment of what's needed in the community and saying we're going to change these day-to-day activities that we do, there's not a lot of takers usually. And so building up the momentum to get people to participate in that civic realignment so we can execute better as a whole has been some of the hardest work to date for us. We've been able to accomplish it in a few respects, but we still do have a long ways to go. In addition to that, there's a lot of prescriptive funding in the past years in our community. So the prescriptive funding follows some of the incumbent folks that are out there and their entrenched thinking. So unlocking that prescriptive funding has been very difficult, but the pandemic has actually helped with that because it kind of, how to say it best, knocked a few people over the head and said, I guess we have to do these things now. And so, but before that, it was very, very difficult. And so there's those elements that sit out there that have been very tough. Obviously, Memphis is a poor city. We're always top 5 poor city in the country. And so access to resources and capital is very, very important. So think about trying to, build a business, but the average, net worth for African Americans is $8,000, right? And so things are tough to do here when it comes to that. So surrounding them with family and friends, mentors, support resources, et cetera, that has also been a challenge for us too.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's challenging in a lot of places, right? And so I love I love and appreciate all of the themes that we're bringing in here and that you can speak to. You mentioned in our previous conversation, this sort of status quo thinking, like let's just create, everything sort of at an even keel. And so you're talking about implementing change and creating positive change. And so, and I want to circle back a little bit to the OZ component. So weaving this all together, did the OZ component change the status quo thinking? Did it have an impact on dialogue with traditional capital? Like, how did that all play into this bigger picture? The OZ that is.
I think it did, right? Because, there's a variety of OZs, obviously, that are in our community. The one that we're speaking to is arguably the largest development in Memphis's history. And, there's, at first people think, well, hey, you have these developers that they can just fund everything, but that's not how it works. I mean, they have a capital stack, but that capital stack has to be matched with other incentives. So, at first you're looking at tax increment financing to try to help support things along those lines. Then there was a switch from looking at TIFs to looking at a pilot structure, especially with the pandemic hitting right in the middle there. And so there is a lot of work with our government and quasi-government agencies to go out there and get approved other incentives that could match up to this. Only though, if the OZ and the developers work true to what they said they would do. Would they be equitable in terms of, the actual construction of the project? Would they actually support small businesses in the surrounding areas? Would there be a ripple effect into other communities? Could they use some of their capital stack to support things that are happening in the surrounding communities? And can they build systems and new things that could have cascading returns going forward? So yes, there's these incentives that come with it that we had to go lobby for and get support of, but we have to make sure there's a strong plan where they actually believe that was going to get executed upon. And so I think that was something that was very unique, and being able to see the types of people that have come together to work overall on this.
Yeah, it takes such a variety of people, right? I mean, you talked a little bit about Memphis, there maybe even like a little bit of a resistance to some of the changes you were making, but that traditional capital and the social impact part, I think that's what a lot of people I know on this call and just in general are interested in hearing about. It's OZ impact, social impact, and can that change the language around and the understanding about traditional investment? Because I know you guys are raising capital, correct?
Yeah, we're raising dollars, and a good intersection there is we can actually bring dollars to the table that the developers can't, right? So even though they're providing resources, we have nonprofit structures that we can use to go after resources that support things, in particular in public domain, that make the project even better. So there's a nice complement to that, where there's other opportunities that exist that we're out there raising dollars for in complement to it.
Yeah. Do you think that there is an uphill climb here with having venture to understand impact and the two talking to each other? I mean, we did speak a little bit about this on our past conversation, but having those two different types of conversations intersect. Do you have any strategies for that you'd like to share with this group?
Yeah, I think it depends on, so we're in a pretty unique position, right? We're a venture development group that has several business entities, right, that allow us to go multiple different ways. We can create fund structures that can accept the private equity dollars, whether it's from the developers of the OZ or from limited partners that we already have. And that can spur a lot of startup development, right? But then there's nonprofit structures that can help raise business and technical assistance support, that can also help raise grant dollars, that we also use to help kind of spur more SMWBE, Main Street retail kind of support there as well. one of the things that what we have here in Memphis, obviously being 63% African American, and looking at a lot of the social justice support that's been coming on with everything around George Floyd, there's more people who are looking to support venture, but in a very equitable way. And that just doesn't range from private equity money, but from a lot of foundations nationally, from a lot of corporations as well, who are saying, oh, if we can maybe support an organization like yourselves because you support more diversity in terms of who you fund, then yes, we will be a little bit more speculative with our dollars and maybe not demand such high return as your normal 30 to 40% returns that venture demands. And so there are these elements of how you have to kind of broker what you do with those dollars. Obviously, you have to keep things separate depending upon the return expectations of who you're talking to. But we have found a little bit of success breaking it up into those few areas.
Yeah, you just reminded me of something that we talked about in our initial conversation too, and that was like opening up and being able to tap into federal capital as well. And that you mentioned, and I had to go into my notes. You said private sector investors had no idea how many resources they were missing out on, right? And can you speak to that a little bit more too?
Yeah, it's just basically if you're sided up with those who are in the public space, there's other resources that you can tap, right? I mean, and so, yes, there's a lot of federal resources coming online right now. We were able to take advantage of some resources last year and are doing so again this year. A lot of this actually is helping the surrounding area of the OZ, because again, the OZ is just getting started and it will take a couple of years to kind of get built up because again, it was mostly a blighted area. So yes, we've been working off those. We have people who are helping us identify those particular sources of capital, whether it's through CARES dollars, whether it's through American Rescue Plan dollars. There's EDA money that's coming available right now with some announcements about 3 or 4 weeks ago that we're trying to work as a community to bring in to our community here in Memphis.
Yeah, it's awesome. There's and there's a couple of questions kind of trickling in now. So
Sure.
So Andre, do you have nonprofit partners, and if so, how do you select them? And does that help in structuring the grants that you potentially are involved in, right?
Sure. We have a variety of nonprofit partners, and it really kind of depends on what area. You know, there's areas that we're working to be more innovative in poverty, more innovative in education, and also into Black business. A lot of that has spawned off of work that was already underway for the past decade or so. And so it's through trusted relationship, but also we want folks who are entrepreneurial in their approach. We don't want folks who kind of come to us and say, we've been doing it a certain way for a certain amount of years and we're not going to change. Because we know that StartCo, we're always trying to build the next set of ideas that get us to the next stage. And so that means that we have to be very flexible. Now, that being said, we do have to have partners who are good at management and administration and being fiscal sponsors and agents, because we like to spend more of our time on coming up with the reform principles that are out there. So just to shed a little bit more light on that, there's kind of 4 elements that we look at for partnerships. Anything you're launching in the community, you need someone first to be able to disrupt and agitate in a way that opens space for a new idea to walk in. You then need someone who can come in with the good reform. What is the innovation that can be introduced to the marketplace? Who has the ability to execute with the tactics, and who can be the planner, the administrator and the manager. So we're always looking for those 4 things. Sometimes we have to play in each of those different roles. Sometimes we have to bring maybe the agitator and disruptor in because they open space for the things that we want to do after them. So those are some of the things that we're looking for when we partner with other nonprofits and service providers.
And if there's 4 things to write down from this conversation, it's those 4 things that you just mentioned. I think that's really insightful and appreciate that. So there's also a couple questions about the impact of businesses and how you can meet them where they are. So one of the questions is, how can capital providers meet the businesses where they are? Is there a disconnect between the investors and small businesses and startups? And if so, how can that be addressed?
Sure. Yeah, so I guess it depends on what type of businesses we're talking about, right? So if you look across the spectrum, small minority women, own businesses. Are we talking about high growth companies, lifestyle businesses? Are we talking about there's just so many, but just to kind of shed some light on a few different areas. We've been focused over the last couple of years on a lot of Main Street businesses, those in the hospitality industry. And so, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, what we have found is they were lacking a lot of technology. They were lacking how to understand online thinking and online communities. We had to help them build new technologies. We had to find resources for them to build these new technologies and new interventions. At the same time, they need help in terms of thinking through, why they don't have product market fit. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what we're always trying to achieve to. So, helping them kind of revisit, go back to their roots, and give them money along the way as they build things back up has been good. They're already carrying a ton of debt. So if we keep introducing debt platforms to them, it's not really helping them too much at this point. Many of them had a ton of debt before the pandemic. Now they have more debt today. And so we're looking at more grant programs that help them execute. And if we are going to look at debt, we're looking at more how do we consolidate their debt with a line of credit at a cheaper rate? So those are some of the things we're looking at on the small business side of things. With regards to the venture side of things, we're really focusing on startups to be something that we bet on to think about tomorrow. So a lot of the small business activity kind of gets us back to where we were, right? How do we get a lot of those businesses back to where they were? But we're trying to think forward in terms of new jobs that need to be created. Our city was hit in a very strong way, and a lot of businesses closed and are not coming back. And so we need to replenish that the right way. So we're also using technology infrastructure to help advance things. So we're looking at putting infrastructure in different areas of our community that in a very ethical way collects data on mobile devices so we can understand better pedestrian patterns, vehicle patterns, intersections, and safety, but also how do we package that data so that small businesses and retail businesses understand the movement that's happening outside their stores. And maybe they could use that to help their marketing strategies. Maybe they can use that in terms of their advertising and things of that nature. So we're really applying what started as a smart city effort with the WalkOn Union. We're looking and scoping more of the Memphis area. And this is what I mean by being a force multiplier. We're taking the elements that we're applying in a smart city development from scratch and trying to apply it to the surrounding communities that are out there. And this is where we also are building this test bed where we want to attract more startups, venture capital, and corporate anchors to start supporting some of this activity as well.
Yeah, so you mentioned Main Street businesses. Do you feel like those are the ones that are primed most for equity type investments?
Well, not necessarily equity type investments. It just depends on what they're trying to do. I mean, that kind of fits more into the small business category, at least the ones that we've been seeing, here in the Memphis realm. So if anything, we're trying to assist with grants or consolidation of debt through a line of credit or something along those lines. Now, if they do have an innovative idea or some means that can scale and grow, then yes, equity could make sense. But for the most part, we're reserving a lot of our equity dollars for more high growth opportunities that we see out there.
Right. The scale is a critical component, right? The growth portion.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to encourage other people to ask questions. If you'd like for Andre, I like to ask kind of bring this full circle with the opportunity zone theme and the social impact theme. Is there something that you really want people to know about opportunity zones and how they play into social impact? Or
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's we collaborate sometimes, or I should say I pick the brain of sometimes a group out in San Francisco, the Bay Area Economic Council, and they wrote a white paper, can't even remember, I think back in 08 or 07, called the Innovation Driven Economic Development Model. And it speaks in there towards what we think regional innovation could be or should be in communities. And I like how they position it. So when I'm looking at the opportunity zone that we're in, I'm not just thinking about how do we create jobs or meaningful jobs of the future. I'm also thinking about how we make sure that it's a livable community, creating great places to play and work. how are we being very deliberate about social inclusiveness and working together there? And then obviously collaborative governance. I mean, at the end of the day, I think it speaks to how do we make sure there's enough density in our areas to create more serendipitous collisions. The serendipitous collisions is where the opportunities sit out there. Many times underserved communities don't have access to the mentorship, the wealth, the guidance, or the social currency to actually grow businesses or get connected to the right opportunities. So you're being deliberate about networking those things together so that way they can build their network up. So I've been spending a lot more time on social currency and the networking assets that are needed to kind of be the glue to these opportunity zones and the connecting areas.
Yeah, it's just fantastic. I feel like, my mind's being blown and the gears are turning, and I hope that in a way, I hope that everybody else is feeling that way too. Sybil's chiming in and saying how overwhelmingly useful it is. I think that's great. So Andre, thank you. I mean, if you have any sort of parting thoughts or any announcements that you would like to make, feel free. I want to be conscious of time. We do have an hour scheduled, but certainly want to give you the floor. And if any last minute questions come in, certainly happy to ask them. Any sort of parting words or thoughts? I just want to thank you for being here, and thanks to everybody who attended.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that, a couple of things that I've spoken about today goes back to some time that I spent on a charter commission when we're trying to consolidate our city and county government here in Memphis. And there is a former mayor of Indianapolis, Stephen Goldsmith, came and spent some time with us, but he wrote a book called The Power of Social Innovation. And it speaks to some of those elements. How do you go from being a socially entrepreneurial community to a civically entrepreneurial community, basically meaning putting systems approaches in place. And so some of what I spoke about is from that book that I highly recommend those that are out there. And then I would also just say, in your conversations with your economic leaders, whatever type of theme or philosophy your opportunity zone is kind of centered around, how do we ensure that we're at the table in those conversations, whatever those agendas are. So a lot of times our agenda wasn't in the conversation going back many years ago. And so many decisions were being made, and we felt like this innovation and entrepreneurial agenda many times wasn't there. And so spending time to be at the table and figuring out who could help you there, I think is just going to be critical.
And another question did come in right as you're speaking about that. And it's Melvin says, how have you included influencers in deploying your projects in the Memphis area? Athletes, entertainers, anything like that?
Yeah, sure. Not so much of the entertainers or athletes per se. There's many other influencers, such as those who are managing family offices here, those who are CEOs and CIOs of corporations here, that we've leaned on, and built relationships with them over the years, and have had them to help speak for us, as we have moved forward. And that's helped a lot, but that takes time. A lot of times the sales process for bringing an influencer on is quite intense in itself. So, spending a few months to be deliberate around that strategy, I think is worth it.
Hey, really appreciate you. I know Rachel Riley is here, and I want to say if anybody needs to contact either one of you, she's involved in the capacity as well around this. And so appreciate you, Rachel, for helping set this up. Andre, thanks, man. Really incredible conversation, and thank you for being so open and in providing all this information. It's a lot, and we'll make it available to people online as well.